Hey everyone, how y'all doing? My name is Mateo and I am from Maschine Masters. In today's episode of Mix Talk, we are going to discuss mid-frequency harshness. Now, for any of you that mix your own music or try to do mastering on your tracks, you may have encountered some instances of a buildup of harshness in the mid-range of your mixes. And this is natural because most of the instrumentation that you use will live in the mid-range, and vocals mostly live in the mid-range too. So there are a lot of frequencies that are compounding in that range. Also, the human ear is most sensitive in this range. So in this particular instance that I mixed for a client, I was happy with the mix, the client liked the mix, but I always include a louder version of the mixes. Not a master necessarily, just a louder version, because most people typically enjoy listening to their music kind of louder in your face, as opposed to the more natural, more dynamic sounds. And you know what? It's just very common nowadays, just because everything we listen to is so compressed. However, it was not my job to master this. This is just a courtesy I do for all my clients. So once I applied my compression to my master for this track, I noticed that there was a bit of harshness that was not there when I didn't have the compression. Now, the reason for this is because your typical limiters or compressors will basically compress all the frequencies the same way. So if the limiter or compressor is being triggered more by the bass frequencies, unfortunately, the compressor and limiter is not going to differentiate between the bass and the higher frequencies unless it has that feature. Now, this is why this can sometimes mess up some of the balance of the frequencies in your mix. So when I did this, the mids sounded a little harsher than they were supposed to. Now, in this particular scenario, I would bring in a multiband compressor, and this is typically what mastering engineers use. They usually apply compression to different bands so that they can control the amount of compression across the frequency spectrum. So first, let me play you the track without any compression on it. It's just the final mix, and then we'll compare it to the version that has the compression on the overall mix. Cool. So my original mix was peaking at around -4, -5 area. So that leaves a decent amount of headroom for the mastering phase. And there's plenty of dynamics. Now I'm going to apply the compression on the master. Now for this, please adjust your monitors because this will be significantly louder. Great. So, like I said, once I applied all the compression, it squashed the mix, and certain frequencies were starting to sound a little harsh, particularly the mids. So, I'm going to show you how I address that with one of my favorite multiband compressors. Okay, so here I have McDSP's ML4000 multiband compressor, and I know it looks a little overwhelming, and multiband compression probably freaks out a lot of you if you're not used to using it, but it is a very powerful tool, and if you plan on doing any kind of mastering or anything like that, it's really, really useful. It's something that you should look at and learn. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to play back my selection, and I'm going to play it back with the multiband compressor out and then bring it in and then take it out again, just so you can compare and listen to the mid-range and hear for whether or not the harshness goes away. And keep in mind, this is a very subtle difference. Now, I mix the track, so I don't want this to dramatically change my mix. I'm happy with my mix. The whole point of this is just to control the harshness in the mids, so it will be very subtle. Great. So I brought in the multiband compressor a few bars in, and then I took it out just before the end of the loop. So hopefully you didn't hear a difference in the overall sound of the mix. Hopefully what you heard was that the mix sounded less harsh in the mids, and that was the goal. So I'm going to show you how I got my settings to be able to control the harshness in the mids. All right, great. So I have a new instance of the plugin, and first off, I'm going to deactivate a bunch of the stuff that I don't need. So I don't need the gate, I don't need the expander, and I don't need the limiter portions of this plugin. I'm just focusing on the compressor. And since I'm targeting the mids, I'm going to deactivate all the other bands. And I've selected the compression module here. Now, before I get going, what I want to do is I want to make sure I'm targeting the right frequency range. So I'm going to go to my crossover window, and this right here is the band that we're using, and I'm going to adjust the crossover on either ends to just focus on the range that I want to control. And I'm going to solo it first. Cool. So what I was listening for there, I've selected between 1 kilohertz and 7 kilohertz. And the reason why I chose that range is because that's where I feel like the majority of the harshness is. And I don't want to get too low into the bass and low mids, because that's kind of where the body and warmth of the track is. And I like where those frequencies are sitting. And unfortunately, if I get too many of those low frequencies in there, those might prematurely trigger the compression, and I don't want that. I really want to focus on the mids. So I was bringing it up just around the point where you're not getting much low mids in there. It's mostly just mids. And then on the top end of the crossover, I brought it down right to the point where I wasn't getting some of that really high stuff, like the more brilliant stuff, the stuff that kind of sounds all shimmery on top of the mix, you know? I don't want to dull the sound of the mix. I was focusing on that range, you know? Just getting the crossover just before it starts getting those nice highs. Okay, so I'm going to unmute this, and now we're going to start setting up our compression. So the three things that I do immediately are adjust my knee, my ratio, and my attack. So first things first, I want to have a soft knee. And what a soft knee means is that there's a curve to the compression that allows the compressor to start reacting to the signal before the signal exceeds the thresholds. Now, the reason why that's really good is because that offers a more natural, gradual compression. So it becomes less noticeable that it's compressing because of that gradual slope. The next thing I'm going to do is set my ratio, and I usually set my ratio pretty low. I set it to 1.7 to 1 ratio, so it's very, very low ratio. Again, we're going for subtlety. The third thing that I do is crank my attack to the fastest. And now this is counterintuitive to wanting a subtle compression, but because we have a very low ratio and we have a soft knee, those two things are going to help maintain a subtle effect. The main key for having the attack really fast is because we want to make sure we capture any harshness that occurs in that mid-range. We want to prevent the listener from being annoyed by any surprising harshness. So that's why I set the attack to the fastest. And then I usually leave the release pretty slow, anywhere between 150 milliseconds to 200 milliseconds. I'll leave it at 200 milliseconds and I'll adjust it after I start listening to it if I feel like it needs adjusting. Okay? So now that we've got that set up, I'm going to hit play and I'm going to bring the threshold down, and I'm aiming for about no more than -3 decibels of gain reduction. I mean, even 3 decibel gain reduction is a little much, but yeah, no more than that. So I'm going to set that now. Okay, so when I bypass the multiband compressor to compare how the mids are being affected, I'm getting a dip in the mids now because of the compression. So that's naturally going to happen. What we need to do to compensate for that is to increase the gain of this band. So I'm going to gradually increase the gain and then bypass the compressor and bring it back in and compare it until I feel like the change between the compression in and the compression out is seamless. Okay, that sounds pretty seamless to me. It's pretty good where it is. So that's how I set up my multiband compression to control that mid-range harshness. So now for those of you that have tried mastering your own tracks and have felt like you've gotten this buildup of harshness in the mids and didn't know how to address it, well, hopefully this will apply to your needs. So give this a try. And if any of you still feel, I guess, very intimidated by multiband compression, let me know that you want me to go into more depth with multiband compression, and I'll figure out how to put together a series of these and better demystify multiband compression. So try it out. Hopefully it works for you. Thanks again to all of you that checked out this tutorial. We really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions about what we covered in this tutorial, please feel free to leave it in the comment section below. Also, if you have any suggestions for future tutorials, also leave that in the comment section below. As always, please like and share this video and subscribe to Maschine Masters to keep up with all our latest tutorials. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.